Okay, welcome back to the channel. Today we are continuing our practice question series. If you're enjoying these videos, please like and subscribe. I appreciate that, and it really helps me so I can keep putting out these videos. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you've been studying with us, keep at it. It's going to pay off in the end. As usual, if you need any of our study materials, you can check out our website at rbtexamreview.com. Our store at gumroad.com/RBT Exam Review, or one of these links, which I'll put in the comments and descriptions below. We offer 2 practice exams, the full-length RBT Taskless Study Guide. Our combo pack comes with everything, plus flashcards. And then we have a competency study guide for both the initial and the reassessment. So with that said, any questions, please email me or leave a comment. I'm happy to help. And let's get into it. Okay, question 1. You're working with your BCBA and your client's mom on developing a reinforcement system where the client can earn money for completing non-preferred tasks. The plan is to reduce maladaptive behavior when given a non-preferred task demand. The client will earn $1 for each task completed and will lose $1 each time maladaptive behavior occurs for more than 2 minutes when given a demand. Removing a dollar best represents what? Okay, so your intervention is your client essentially earns tokens, right? Because tokens are simply condition reinforcers that you exchange for goods, right? And in this case, your client will be earning $1 for each task completed, and then we'll lose $1. So the question is asking, right? Removing $1 represents what? What intervention or what type of intervention is removing $1? So immediately you should start thinking, okay, removing, right, is negative something typically, right? So we might be looking for that choice, but there's also a specific term in a token economy for when we remove tokens that someone has earned, okay? So if you've studied your terms and definitions, okay, you should know this, right? So what is that specific term in token economies for removing a token that your client has earned? Well, is it A, negative reinforcement? Well, it's not negative reinforcement, right? Because we're removing something in response to a maladaptive behavior, which we're trying to decrease, right? So it is negative because we're taking away, but it's not reinforcement, right? It's punishment. We're trying to decrease the behavior. So A is wrong. B, response cost. Response cost is, okay, removing a token in response to a behavior, right, that they have earned, okay? So in this scenario, removing $1 is a response cost, okay? You do what you're supposed to do, you earn a token. You don't do what you're supposed to do, you get a token removed, okay? So B, response cost, removing $1 best represents response cost. Always read all your answer choices. Extinction, we're not putting anything on extinction, right? Okay, we're taking something away as punishment. D, positive punishment. So it is a form of punishment, right? But it is negative because we are removing something, okay? So the answer is B. That's a tricky question. If you got it right, great job. If not, review, okay, some of your terms, some of your definitions, okay, and come back to it. Question 2. There are several ways to collect information about a client when conducting assessments. What is the least reliable assessment measure? So when we're doing functional behavior assessments, okay, there's many parts to it. There's many different ways to do it, okay? But some assessment measures are more reliable than others. And why is that? Well, because some assessment measures, we are directly observing the client, and some are not. And then some assessment measures, we're even manipulating things in the environment, okay? So this question is asking, what is the least reliable assessment measure? So again, a very easy question, right? If you know your terms and definitions, okay? So look at A, indirect assessment. Immediately you should know indirect assessment, right? We don't directly observe the client, okay? We're not actually watching the client do anything, okay? We're simply conducting surveys and interviews and checklists. Therefore, it's the least reliable way to assess, okay? B, direct assessment is better because we're actually watching the client. Same with event recording, okay? We're watching the client, we're observing the client interact with their environment, so it's better. And then functional analysis, of course, is the best assessment measure because we are manipulating antecedents and consequences to determine functions. But the least reliable one is an indirect assessment. And that's why you should always, always, always have at least some form of direct assessment before we write a treatment plan. Okay. Indirect assessments aren't enough to tell us about the client. 3, every Monday, your BCBA asks you to conduct preference assessments for your client who has rotating interest. This Monday, you select 5 items you know the client played with in the past. You present item 1 and item 2 to your client and say, pick one. You do this for all the items in different combinations. What type of preference assessment did you conduct? Okay, so pretty common occurrence for some of our clients where their interests will rotate, right? It's hard to find a consistent item that functions as a reinforcer that they're willing to work for. So we're constantly conducting preference assessments. And in this case, okay, you're doing one every Monday and you're presenting how many items? Well, you're presenting item 1 and item 2. So you're presenting 2 items and you're saying pick one. Okay. So what type of preference assessment is this? So when you're doing a preference assessment question, right, that's the question you should first ask, right? How many items are we assessing? Okay. Because if it's 1 item, then you immediately know it's going to be single stimulus. If it's 2 items, you know it's forced choice. And if it's 3 or more, then you know it's going to be some sort of multiple stimulus. And then if it's just, all the items, that's going to be a natural assessment, right? But that's the question you should ask first, okay? You're always looking for ways to remember these things. And when you're doing preference assessments, ask yourself, how many items are we looking at? In this scenario, we're looking at item 1 and 2, okay? So 2 items at a time. So immediately, that should tell you what? This is a forced choice assessment, right? So what are you doing? You're presenting 2 items, and you're saying pick one, okay? And then the one they don't pick, you replace. You do it again, 2 items, pick one. And you do that for all the items in different combinations. And you track, okay, how many times each item was picked, right? And you have a little hierarchy, okay? But the important thing is you're putting 2 items out there and you're forcing your client to pick one, hence forced choice. So again, ask yourself, how many items am I assessing in this preference assessment? 1, 2, 3 or more. You are recording instances of nail biting as part of a self-stimulatory behavior assessment. You are taking partial interval data on nail biting in intervals of 10 for 5 intervals. During interval 1, your client bites their nails twice. Interval 2, they don't bite their nails. Interval 3, they bite their nails 6 times, and then they don't bite their nails in interval 4 and 5. What would your data indicate? So, data question, okay? So the very important piece in this question is kind of hidden at the start of it, okay? And that's what makes this question tricky, because if this was just written, right, a different way, it'd be very simple, right? There's a lot going on though. So what is the question asking? Start there. What would your data indicate? So in order to determine what our data indicates, we need to know what kind of data we're taking, okay? Because given the scenario of nail biting and how many times it happened, right, our data could look different depending on the data we're taking. But what kind of data are we taking? Well, look at the second sentence. You're taking partial interval data. So what do we know about partial interval data? We know that if the behavior happens at any point during our intervals, it counts as a response. How many responses? Just 1, right? So regardless of how many times that behavior happened in the interval, we're only going to record 1 behavior. Okay, and that's very important to remember, right, with interval recording, okay, because in this scenario, you'll see in the answer choices, if we were taking, say, frequency data, our data would look different, right? But we're not. We're taking partial interval data, okay? So, question, what would your data indicate? Would our data indicate 8 instances of nail biting? Well, no, because we're only taking partial interval data. We're only recording a single response for each interval if it happened, okay? So we're not taking frequency data. So our data would not show 8 instances, right? B, the client bit their nails 0 intervals. Well, no. Okay. Um, Perhaps if we were taking whole interval data, right, we would show 0 intervals depending on how long the intervals were, right? Because in whole interval, you have to bite your nails the entire interval, okay? But we're not taking whole interval data. We're taking partial interval. So C, the client bit their nails 2 out of the 5 intervals. So this looks pretty good, right? During interval 1, we bit our nails twice, okay? So that's 1 response. Interval 2, they don't bite their nails, so we still have 1 response. Interval 3, bite their nails 6 times, 2 responses. And then 4 or 5, no biting, 0 responses. Therefore, 2 out of 5 intervals, the client bit their nails. So C is great. C looks really good. Always read all your answer choices. D, your client bit their nails an average of 4 times. Maybe that's true, but that's not the data we're taking, okay? So the point of this question is to really emphasize the importance of knowing what type of data you're taking, okay? Because that can affect how your data looks, right? And our assessment of that data. So the answer here is C, the client bit their nails 2 out of the 5 intervals. You just started a new job. Your old job paid you with a check, but your new job pays you via direct deposit. Every other Friday, your check is deposited into your bank account between 2 and 4 p.m. What kind of reinforcement schedule best represents your check being deposited? All right, so good reminder from this question that everything we do in behavior analysis applies to our real life, right? Sometimes we think it just exists in a vacuum, right? Because we either work in a clinic setting every day or we just work in a household, right? But you have to remember all these behavioral principles apply to our everyday life. So a lot of these questions will be application questions regarding, okay, that idea of how does it affect your life, okay? So in this question, every other Friday, your check is deposited in your bank account between 2 and 4 p.m. And we're looking at basic reinforcement schedules. So we need to figure out the best answer, okay, for what reinforcement schedule represents our check being deposited. So what do you know immediately? Okay, what can you ask yourself immediately? Well, you can either ask yourself, am I dealing with a fixed or a set amount, or am I dealing with a variable amount? Okay, or you can ask yourself, am I dealing with the time or responses? So since I think the second one is easier in this case, right? We're dealing with time. So immediately, what do you know about basic reinforcement? Well, you know you're looking at an interval schedule, okay? So you can eliminate A and C because we're dealing with time, right? No matter how many responses or how many times you check your bank account, you're not going to see your check until a certain time, okay? That's why it's not an FR or VR, because you could check your bank account a million times, but until that time comes, right, until enough time has passed, you're never going to see your check in that account. Okay, so we're dealing with interval here. Now, the second question is it fixed or is it variable? So are we dealing with a set amount each time, or is it an average, right? Well, between 2 and 4 p.m. indicates that it could happen at 2, at 2:30, 3, 3:30, or 4, right? It could happen at any point between those two times, right? So realistically, the average is 3 p.m., okay? Therefore, the best answer here is a variable interval schedule. An average amount of time, okay, your check is deposited into your bank account. If you don't understand how we got there, okay, review your basic reinforcement schedules and start asking yourself these type of questions, right? Is it a fixed or is it an average? Is it a response or is it time? Okay. Basic reinforcement schedules are tricky when you first start studying, but I promise you, as you get to know them, they become extremely, extremely simple. Okay. Our answer is D. Jim's client engages in protest behavior, but never engaged in self-injurious behavior until yesterday. Yesterday, when presented with a task demand, Jim's client fell to the floor and started to bang his head. In response, Jim offered him the iPad. Now, Jim's client will headbang until he gets the iPad. What function most likely maintains headbanging? Okay, pretty common scenario, right? Where we have a client who we know their behavior pretty well, and then one day they engage in a new behavior, and we might accidentally reinforce it, okay? So my advice is always when you see a new behavior that you haven't seen before, you should take note of it, you should observe it, but you should really do your best to not panic and accidentally reinforce it. Okay. And in this case, it seems like Jim accidentally reinforced the headbanging. Okay. So our question is asking, what function does the headbanging now serve? Okay. What is the purpose of the headbanging? So remember, every behavior has a function. Every behavior serves a purpose. Typically, behavior happens to gain or remove something. Okay. We have our 4 functions: escape, tangible, attention, and automatic. So why is the client engaging in headbanging? Well, ask yourself, when he first headbanged, what did Jim do? Jim offered him the iPad. Okay. So he gave him something, okay, in response to the headbanging. Now, what happens? When the client wants the iPad, what does he do? Well, he headbangs, right? That was what he was taught, right? If you headbang, you get the iPad. And that's a really important lesson, and why it's so important to be smart and consistent, okay, with how we treat behavior. Because remember, when we reinforce or we punish, we're actually teaching, okay, our client how their behavior is going to result, what's the result of the behavior. And by giving them an iPad in response to banging his head, well, we just essentially taught them a functional way to get the iPad through headbanging. So what function most likely maintains headbanging? Is it escape? Is Jim's client trying to escape from anything? Initially, it seemed like he might have been, right? He presented with task demand, he headbanged. But now, right, after the reinforcement was given, okay, with the iPad, okay, the function has changed. It's no longer escape, okay? It's actually tangible, right? Jim's client now headbangs to get the iPad. He headbangs, the function of the behavior is gaining a tangible, which is the iPad. It's not attention, not automatic, okay? Initially, it looked like escape, but when Jim delivered a reinforcer, okay, that behavior changed into gaining access to a tangible, okay? So good function question here, right? Real life scenario, right? This could realistically happen to you, and you just have to be aware, okay, and be ready and make sure we're not accidentally reinforcing these behaviors. You and your BCBA perform a task analysis for making peanut butter toast. The task analysis in order is get bread and peanut butter, put bread in toaster, take bread out when done, grab knife, put peanut butter on knife, spread peanut butter. Your client has all but mastered the skill, but today your BCBA unplugged the toaster before your client could put the bread in, forcing the client to have to plug in the toaster. Which of the following answers best represents this scenario? Ooh, all right, tough question, okay? Kind of an open-ended question, right? We've got a lot of stuff going on, a lot of scenarios, okay? But we're looking for our best answer 1, and then we're looking for the best answer that describes what happened in this question, okay? So immediately you might just say, oh, well, we're task chaining. And that could be true, okay? But that does task chaining best describe the scenario, okay? Maybe not. What was different about this task chain, and what don't we know? Okay. Well, our answer choices are all forward chaining, backwards chaining, total task chaining, and behavior chain interruption strategy. Do we know if we're forward or backwards chaining? And be careful. Okay. Don't immediately say forward chaining. Okay. Because you don't really know. And why don't we know? Well, we don't know when reinforcement is being delivered, right? It doesn't say anything about when we're prompting or when we're delivering reinforcement. The only thing we know is the task analysis. We know the client's pretty much mastered the skill, and we know the BCBA unplugged the toaster this time and did something different, okay? So we can't say if it's forward or backwards chaining, right? And we can't say if it's total task chaining, okay? We don't know, right? There's no indicator of the prompt or the reinforcer. So what do we know? Well, we know the BCBA interrupted the chain this time and forced a different behavior, okay, to be emitted. And that is called a behavior chain interruption strategy. A behavior chain interruption strategy, okay, occurs when we disrupt a chain and we change something in a learned behavior chain, forcing our client to exhibit a different behavior, okay? And this is a good way to teach, right, natural behavior chains, right? Because in the real world, behavior changes don't always happen perfectly. When we're teaching them, we'd like to contrive them perfectly. Okay, so in this scenario, we always have everything out on the counter, everything's plugged in, and we're just trying to teach them the basics of making toast. However, now that they've learned it, okay, what happens if the chain, what happens in the chain if the toaster's unplugged? Well, you have to plug it in. What happens if you can't find the knife? Well, you have to go wash a knife or get a different utensil. Okay, so there's a million things, right? Behavior chains and task analysis exist in a perfect world, but we know the world's not perfect. So in behavior chains, a million different things can happen. A behavior chain interruption strategy helps us prepare for that by breaking that chain and forcing our clients to evoke or emit different behaviors. And in this scenario, unplugging the toaster, broke the chain, and forced the client, okay, to have to plug in the toaster before they could have toast. So D is our answer. This is a good chaining question. Be careful about not adding information to the question that they didn't give you. Okay, people want to answer forward and backwards chaining for these questions. All right, but we don't know. We don't know anything about that. Okay, only answer based on the information you're given. You're asked to graph some data for your BCBA who's completing a report. You're given data on 10 sessions. The data recorded tracked the number of times your client spit on the table. The client's name is Lizzie. Spitting would go where on your graph? Okay, so if you happen to work at a place that does not use electronic data collection and you're still using paper and pencil, you might have to graph some data. Okay, and that's the kind of funny thing about the RBT exam now is a lot of places are now electronic. We don't have to worry about graphing, but some places still do. And if you're one of those places, you need to know this. Okay, so what's going on in this question? Well, we're looking at a BCBA who needs you to graph data on spitting. So we have our data. We already have our data. Okay. We know the client's name. The question is asking spitting would go where on your graph. So all it's asking is where does your behavior go? Okay. Spitting is our behavior. Sessions is our time. Okay. Client's name is Lizzie. So Lizzie would probably go in the title. Where would spitting go? Where does behavior go on our line graphs? Okay. What part? Is it the title? Well, maybe, right? But that's not the best answer. Okay. We're looking for the best answer here, right? So we might put spitting in the title, but we don't know enough about how your BCBA is doing things. Okay. There's only one definitive answer that's consistent every single time. Okay. The condition change line? No, the condition change line tells us when we're changing conditions. Okay. The x-axis or the y-axis. So in a line graph, what goes on the x-axis? Time, right? Sessions, days, hours, minutes. What goes on the y-axis? Behavior, okay? The behavior we're tracking goes on the y-axis. The time goes on the x-axis, okay? Spitting would go on the y-axis, all right? So simple graphing question, okay? Always pick your best answer, okay? So you looked at A and said, well, it might go in the title, okay? But the better answer here is the y-axis because the y-axis is definitive. It happens every time, okay? So if you don't understand this, okay, go check out my graphing video, right? Where I break down this completely, okay? Always, always, always know that the graphing questions are not meant to be challenging, okay? They're really not. They're really easy. You just need to know the parts of the graph, where things go on the graph, okay? And then when you're looking at a graph, what do you see? The answer is y-axis. Discrete trial teaching is a primary method of instruction used in applied behavior analysis. DTT has a clear beginning and an end, which makes it effective for teaching behaviors. Which of the following answer choices list the correct order of a standard trial? All right, so there is a correct order for a trial, believe it or not, right? There's a certain way we do things, deliver things, okay? And common mistakes are made when RBTs are first doing DTT, where they'll try to mix some of the stuff around. So we need to know the correct order, okay, in order to implement DTT correctly. So let's look at A. Discriminative stimuli, prompt, response, consequence, pause. B, prompt, discriminative stimuli, response, consequence, pause. C, discriminative stimuli, prompt, response, pause, consequence. And then D, discriminative stimuli, response, prompt, pause, consequence. So these are the 5 parts of our DTT trial. We have an SD, we have a prompt if needed, we have a response, we have a consequence, and then we have a post or trial pause. Okay. What order do we go in? Well, you should immediately know what comes first, right? Which is our SD. Okay. Our SD always comes first. The prompt does not come first. Now, if we were looking at MOs, the MO would come before the SD, but we're not. Okay, there's no MOs in this scenario. So our SD comes first, so B is out. What follows the SD? Okay. And this is where people usually get this wrong. Does the prompt come before the behavior or after? The prompt comes before the behavior, okay? The prompt comes right after the SD, before the behavior. The prompt functions as another SD, right? And that's why we fade prompts, because when we prompt behavior, okay, the prompt actually takes on the properties of the SD. So the prompt comes after the behavior or after the SD, before the behavior, right? So A and C are now options, D is out. So what's next, okay? SD, prompt, response. Do we pause before the consequence or after? Okay, we pause after, right? So we have a post-trial pause, right? And then we reintroduce. So the correct order is SD, prompt, response, consequence, pause. Answer is A. Which of the following is an ethical concern regarding the use of punishment in applied behavior analysis? So, although punishment is not our first option, right? It is something we use, okay? We talked about response cost earlier, right? Punishment is something we use, okay? You know, it's if all else fails or if it's part of a treatment package, okay, we will use punishment. But there are ethical concerns regarding punishment. And what is an ethical concern? Okay. A, punishment is ineffective. B, punishment is immoral. C, punishment is unrealistic. And D, punishment is not permanent. Well, A, we know is not correct, right? We know punishment can be effective. We know punishment can reduce behavior. If you want an extreme example, think of very extreme and harsh punishments. Okay, those are effective at reducing behavior, so A is incorrect. B, punishment is immoral. Some punishment might be immoral, right? But response cost, where you're just removing a token, I wouldn't consider that immoral, right? So B is out. C, punishment is unrealistic. Again, it's all about how you design it. Okay, so punishment doesn't have to be unrealistic. It just depends on how you're designing it and implementing it. Okay, so that leaves us with D. Punishment is not permanent. Okay, and this is one of my things I always try to remember for myself as a BCBA, and I always emphasize to parents. Okay, because it's very important for parents, especially parents who might be more old school or might be more punishment heavy, to understand that punishment is not permanent. Meaning that once the punishment stops, the behavior is going to come back. Why is that? Because punishment doesn't teach a behavior. Punishment reduces behaviors. Reinforcement teaches. Punishment reduces. If all you're doing is punishing behaviors with no other interventions, you're not teaching anything different. And remember, all behaviors have a function. All behaviors are trying to gain or get rid of something. If you're punishing a behavior that's trying to gain or get rid of something, okay, and you're reducing that behavior, well, the client still needs to gain or get rid of that item or that escape or whatever it may be, okay? That's why it's important if you're using punishment to always have a replacement behavior handy, because punishment is not permanent. When punishment stops, okay, or if they become resistant to punishment, that behavior is going to come back. So D, the ethical concern is punishment is not permanent. Okay, I hope you enjoyed those questions. If you did, please like and subscribe. Keep studying hard, right? It's going to pay off, I promise. When you do pass, let me know, and so I can give you a shout out. If you need our study materials, okay, make sure you check out our website or our store, okay? Questions, comments, leave them below, email me, happy to help. Other than that, keep studying hard. I'll be back Friday, and I'll see you soon.